Hey, Bert Breer, about 10 minutes left in the show. I got to get your take. I'd be remiss if I didn't get your insight on this topic, Deshaun Watson. Obviously, the Browns went all in on Deshaun Watson. Not only traded capital for him, but spent a lot of capital, fully guaranteeing his contract. And I wonder, Bert, if they did this for a player who may be suspended very soon, if not in the 2022 season, could be 2023. What do you think is going on with Watson, and by extension, because if something's happening with Watson, corresponding move from a football standpoint is Baker Mayfield. What do you think is going on here?
Well, I don't think that they're completely related. Like, I think if the Browns had a suitor for Baker Mayfield, they would trade him now and go forward with the possibility that Jacoby Brissett has to play games for them. They filled out their quarterback depth chart now with both Brissett and Josh Dobbs behind Deshaun Watson, as if Baker Mayfield's not going to be in the roster. So I think that that's sort of separate. That's going to be more about how much money they're willing to eat, and whether or not they can find a suitor, and what happens a couple other places in the league over the next few weeks with how quarterback situations shake out. I think that the Deshaun Watson suspension situation feels like, the very least, it should come to a head over the next 6 weeks or so. The NFL is in Texas this week to meet with Deshaun Watson. Generally, the way these investigations go, that's the last piece of it when you're talking to the player. And that means that they've probably talked to as many of the 22 women that are accusing him as would be willing to talk. And they're wrapping up their investigation. That does not mean there's going to be a ruling, though. It's possible the league decides that they're going to preempt the legal process. What's happened more often than not over the last few years, because the NFL did get themselves in trouble preempting the legal process a few times in the past. Over the last 5 years or so, the NFL has at least preferred to wait for full legal resolution. And what you want to pay attention to here in the calendar is July 1st. There's been an agreement in the courtroom now that if there isn't a resolution on the 22 cases on July 1st, they'll essentially press pause on the case until after the season. And if we get to that point, then the NFL has got to make the decision: do we suspend him now, not knowing what the future is going to hold when it comes to the rest of the legal situation, and go forward making sure that we take him off the field at the beginning of the year? Or do we wait until there's full legal resolution and maybe make this decision in 2023? I think it's unpredictable because of the scope of the case. Like, I think if this was a less high-profile case, less serious charges, the NFL would probably wait until 2023 to do something. I think because of the profile of the case, it could go either way.
And, you wrote something interesting. You said the NFL no longer wants to be in the business of being judge, jury, and executioner on these cases. Do you think that's the right approach? Because I know a lot of us were critical of the NFL for, looking at these situations and kind of judging the seriousness. And this is where they fall into trouble.
Yeah.
You'd have a domestic violence situation, and it was almost like, okay, that's 2 games.
Right.
Somebody is smoking weed. Okay, that's 6 games. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that smoking weed is worse than so do you think it's good that the NFL is kind of stepping away, even though that could be perceived as indifference or an endorsement?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think like what you're getting at here is kind of this feeling that they're taking a handful of grass, throwing it up in the air, and just waiting to see which way the wind blows it before making a final decision. And I think you're referencing the Ray Rice case there, where the initial ruling was a 2-game suspension, which I think from a human standpoint, like, that was a weird thing to digest. When you look at the suspensions for steroids, like you said, marijuana, other things that, right, I mean, from a human perspective, aren't nearly as serious as what Ray Rice was involved in.
And let me just interject, and then I'm gonna give it right back to you. It was almost as if that it was bad enough to go 2 games, right? As you just said, right, Bert. But what made it worse is when Roger Goodell said, "Yeah, well, I talked to Janae Rice." So it's like, and all these advocates are saying, "No, don't do that." I mean, that's textbook, where a lot of times a spouse or a partner will accuse, rightfully so, their partner of this violence, and then start doing this calculus of, well, wait a minute. If they're punished, then that affects my bottom line. If they're punished, then they'll come back. That might put me in more danger. So I'm gonna smooth this over, or in some cases retract it. So there were so many errors with the whole process that the NFL had.
Right, and I think that this is a tricky one too, because there's no criminal charges, and the evidence wasn't sufficient for 2 grand juries in Texas to go forward with the charges. And so, like, that's the one piece of information we have from the courts right now. Then you got the 22 lawsuits that are sort of sitting out there in the ether, and we don't have resolution on any of those. So does the NFL feel like Deshaun Watson's done enough to bring bad light on the league to where we say, okay, we're going to suspend you for being irresponsible? We know at least that you weren't responsible with your social media, you cast the league in a bad light. Well, that's what they used to do. Like, they did that with Ben Roethlisberger in 2010. They've done that with some other players. I really think that year when we had the situations with Ray Rice, with Greg Hardy, and with Adrian Peterson, that was a turning point for how the league was handling discipline in these sorts of situations. And then, of course, the Ezekiel Elliott situation was a couple of years after that. And that was when Jerry Jones really got involved and said, we don't need to be in the business of being judge, jury, and executioner over cases like this. We should let the legal process take the lead. There are authorities who are more qualified to handle these situations than we are. And maybe, yeah, we punish players, but we should not be doing it before the legal system runs its course. And so in this case, the criminal process has run its course, which is why the NFL feels comfortable now talking to the women and talking to Deshaun. They didn't want to interfere with the criminal investigation. Now the question becomes whether or not they feel comfortable with the information they have, where they would preempt the civil process. And that's why I think it's sort of complicated. And again, I think it'd be naive to think that the profile of this case, the profile of the player involved, everything that kind of goes with that isn't a factor in the way they're looking at this and the way that they'll handle the next 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, man. It's really gonna be tough just to see, who the Cleveland Browns are in 2022. Yeah. Just to look at it from an on-field perspective. I see people doing this now. Hey, the Browns are going to be the best team in their division. Like, well, I don't know.
Right.
Tell me.
I mean, Deshaun hasn't played football. Deshaun hasn't played football in 18 months. I mean, that's got to be a factor too. Right.
That too. I mean, I've heard Chris Sims say this, and he is pretty definitive with it. He says if Watson, if he has to miss another year of football, he said, when you see Deshaun Watson again, he's not going to look like a $50 million player. He's just not going to. He's not going to be a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah.
After missing so much time. Eventually he'll get back there, but you can't just.
Well, you hear quarterbacks say it all the time about the rhythm. There's a rhythm of playing football. There's a rhythm to the year. There's an adjustment and then a comfort level you have with the speed with which everything moves out there. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if we should expect the same Deshaun Watson we saw at the end of the 2020 season, at the beginning of the 2022 season, if he's out there. And it's just, there's a lot going on with that, you know what I mean? And for that reason, it's going to be fascinating seeing how they handle training camp, for that matter, and if there is a suspension, how they build their team during training camp.
Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.